Can I hear it one more time for Ann Wright? How many of you are inspired by that? Who's going to go join me on these trips? Our next speaker is Mr. David Barsamian. David, I pronounce it as the Palestinians do with the community there, so I think I pronounced it properly, right? I had many Armenian friends back in Jerusalem. David is an Armenian-American radio broadcaster, writer, and the founder and director of Alternative Radio, a Boulder, Colorado-based syndicated weekly public affairs program heard on some 250 radio stations worldwide. David has altered the independent media landscape, both with his weekly radio shows and his books. His latest book with Noam Chomsky is Global Discontents, Conversations on the Rising Threats of Democracy. Who saw him in Santa Fe when he came to the Lenzik? We saw that. It was amazing. A new edition of his book with Edward Said, Culture and Resistance, 2019. He will be presenting on this tonight. Would you please help me welcome Mr. David Barsamian?
Well, good afternoon, Albuquerque. Brothers, sisters, comrades. It's wonderful to be back to my second home. I'm based in Colorado, of course, but I feel that New Mexico is very close to my heart, and I've been here so many times speaking at the Center for Peace and Justice, and really coming together with some remarkable people who have worked so hard and so long to get our country on a better path. And who more exemplifies that than Sally Alice, our honored guest today. Well, there's a lot to talk about. It's kind of like what Dickens begins, A Tale of Two Cities. It's the best of times and the worst of times. But we have to keep united, we have to keep our spirits up, and I was asked to say something positive, give some hope. So I hope I can give you something of this tangible thing that's so ethereal called hope, because things can change if enough people get together to make that happen. That's the great saying of Margaret Mead, who said years ago, never doubt that a small group of people can change the world. It always has and it always will. And the Justice and Peace Center is so important to bringing us together, because one of the ways that power controls us is through isolation, to atomize us, to get us in front of these handheld devices or iPads or iMacs or PCs, and we get lost in that abyss of electronic messaging. And we need to come together. That's why this institution is so important, because it does provide a space where we can gather and express our desires and move the agenda forward. Chomsky years ago said it's very important for institutions of concentrated power to keep people alone and isolated. That way, they're ineffective. That's to say, us. They can't defend themselves against indoctrination. They can't even figure out what to think. As long as the general population is passive, apathetic, diverted to consumerism or hatred of the vulnerable, then power can do as it pleases. Just a couple of 100 miles from where we're sitting right now, there is an unfolding humanitarian catastrophe. And imagine that, where the government of the United States is separating children from their parents. I mean, this, I don't know if it constitutes a war crime. It's certainly a crime against humanity. I just learned of a boy who was separated from his parents, reunited now in Honduras for 9 months. This is a 6-year-old kid. Just imagine the kind of trauma that kind of enforced isolation and separation generates in such a young child. So this is a scandalous situation. Many of us are sons, daughters, grandchildren of immigrants. My parents, after the Armenian genocide of 1915, met in Beirut, got married there, got on a ship, came to New York with, the clothes on their back. And so this is a country of immigrants. Immigrants have given us so much strength and diversity, and we should be celebrating the fact that we are a country, a rainbow of peoples, of religions, and cultures. So building community, that's the answer. The answer is going to come from the bottom, not from the top. If we're going to wait for these great men, and they're mostly, in quotes, great white men in Washington, to turn things around, it's not going to happen. It's going to happen when we rise up from below and shake, the pillars of power. That's how social change has always happened in this country. That's what Elizabeth Cady Stanton, in 1848, a handful of women met in Seneca Falls, New York, to start the women's movement. What was the response from the establishment then? Oh, you're wasting your time. No one's going to listen to you. Why don't you just, have children and bake cakes and do all the labor at home and in the fields as well. So, that's how movements start, with just a handful of people. So building community. Turn off your TV. Get off the internet. Get out of your house. Drop your tweets and get into the streets. Get off of Facebook. Get off of Facebook and into the face of the powerful. The heat in the streets will melt the creeps in the suites. Hope is not the conviction that something will turn out well, but the certainty that something is worth doing no matter how it turns out. And so, this is a kind of almost magical thing, this idea of hope. But, there was a great saying from Antonio Gramsci, the Italian communist who died after 11 years in Mussolini's prisons in 1937. He said, and Edward Said loved this quote as well, "Pessimism of the intellect, optimism of the will." So what does that mean? You look at the situation, what we're facing in terms of who is sitting in the Oral Office right now, the Supreme Court, the Congress, the media, let's not forget, the profession that I supposedly represent. All of these forces are allied against the will of the people. So that's pessimism of the intellect. Now, optimism of the will is not to engage in magical thinking that, things will just work out. They'll figure, climate change, no problem. They'll figure something out. We cannot go into that area of, do unicorns exist? And magic carpets and all of those kinds of fantasies. We have to be ruthless in our analysis, but then have the optimism that we can change things. That's always historically how things have happened here and elsewhere. I'm going to quote, not quite a local writer, but John Nichols, who lives in Taos. He said, "Despair is an indulgent and despicable bourgeois affectation. You must not allow it." And Eduardo Galeano, who I hope is known to all of you, the great writer of Open Veins of Latin America and a tremendous journalist and historian, he was asked, Don, Don Eduardo, I mean, how do you keep your spirits up? And he always referred to a graffiti he had seen during one of the horrendous military dictatorships that the United States supported in Latin America. The graffiti on the wall said, "Let's save despair for better times." So when we turn this SS Titanic around and away from the iceberg that is looming right in front of us, then maybe we can, kick back and have a few beers or organic chai or whatever your favorite libation is, and then relax. But we've got to stay the course, and we can't be simply good Germans and pretend we don't know what's happening. Martin Niemöller is someone you should all know. You know his poem, "First They Came for the Jews and I wasn't Jewish." Now you know who he is? Let me tell you a little bit about his background because it's very instructive. He was a decorated U-boat officer in the German Navy in World War I. After the war, maybe because of what his experience was, he became a pacifist and a Lutheran minister, and he was part of the resistance against the Hitler regime. And he composed that poem, "First They Came for the Jews." Now I'm going to just update that. First they came for the Arabs, and I didn't say anything. I wasn't Arab. Then they came for the Muslims. Well, I wasn't Muslim. I didn't say anything. Then they came for the LGBTQ community. Well, I wasn't part of that. I didn't say anything. Then they came for the trade unionists. Well, I wasn't a member of a trade union. And then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak out. So this is one of those absolutely critical moments in history, the danger that the country and the planet is facing, primarily because of climate change. And I was recently with the great Ralph Nader, who turned 85 just a couple of days ago. And we were talking about this issue of what's happening with the climate. He chided me, but Ralph is so amiable. You never feel scolded. So he's saying, "David, don't say climate change. Say climate disruption, because that's what it is. Change is too euphemistic. It's too soft. Well, I'll change the part in my hair. I'll change my shirt. I'll change my socks. It's climate disruption. And this and the threat of possible nuclear war, of course, are the two great dangers facing the country and the planet. Now, a very exciting thing happened right now, this weekend, in Austin, Texas. There's a big conference going on, a music festival called South by Southwest. And guess who the main speaker is? Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Okay, this is right off the internet. It's literally hot as I hold it. We just printed it out. She brought in a larger crowd than any of the 2020 presidential contenders. The crowd rose to its feet, whooping and cheering and hollering when Ocasio-Cortez entered. This is the youngest woman in Congress, 29 years old, and a ball of fire and energy, a force of nature. And so what did she talk about? Let me read you some of the quotes. "This idea of like 10% better than garbage shouldn't be something we settle for," she said. "We fix the pipes in Flint first. We fix the electrical grid in Puerto Rico first. And we fully fund the pensions of coal miners in West Virginia." It's not the CEOs sitting in New York and Boston and Washington and Philadelphia that's creating billions of dollars of value a year. It's the workers who are creating it. She said, I think that the effort to divide us by race and class has always been a tool of the powerful to take away power from everyday working people. And that, of course, is what's going on right now, divide and rule. You can see that playing out with the vituperative attacks on Ilhan Omar, the Somali immigrant, incidentally spent 4 years in a refugee camp in Kenya and is being vilified for being anti-Semitic. Incidentally, to just show you how illiterate the public discourse is, Arabs happen to be Semites. So to call Arabs, like Palestinians, anti-Semitic, I mean, it's just, It doesn't track. It's totally wrong. But what has happened is this term has been now conflated with any criticism of the policies of a particular state. So you heard me, you heard our dear comrade Ann Wright criticize the United States. Does that make us anti-American? Of course not. We're pro-American. We want our country to live up to its vaunted ideals and, all that it... Let me just read a couple of other things that she said in Austin. We seek and prioritize profit and the accumulation of money above all else, above any human and environmental cost. To me, that ideology is unsustainable and it cannot be redeemed. She got a huge ovation there in Austin. And I think, when you look around, when Ilhan Omar, Rashida Tlaib, the first Palestinian American to be elected to Congress. Ilhan Omar is from Somalia, as I said. Ayanna Pressley. And then young people like Greta Thunberg. Does that ring a bell with anyone? 16 years old from Sweden, who has led strikes, walkouts all over Sweden that have spread across Europe. She was invited, I don't know how she got this invitation, to meet the masters of the universe. Who do I mean? That crowd that meets every year in Davos, Switzerland. All the great leaders that we're supposed to admire, the CEOs, the Tim Cooks of Apple and the Jeff Bezos of Whole Foods and Amazon. That strike movement is spreading to the United States. When I left Boulder yesterday, I saw a poster saying March 15th, students out on strike. Because of climate disruption, because of the looming catastrophe that this generation, people like this young woman in this row here, they are going to face the consequences of our inaction and our complete obliviousness to solving and addressing this particular issue. So it's not about 2130 or 2090. It's about the next 10 or 12 years. You cannot deny report after report, study after study from the UN International Panel on Climate Change, IPCC, and other agencies, including some very conservative organizations, are all saying that time is running out. When you say this, people get kind of numb or benumbed, But over and over again, the words that are being used to describe this crisis, unprecedented, record-breaking, point of no return. That's how serious it is. And we have climate deniers, sitting in the White House, sitting in Congress, telling us, well, it's not some problem you really have to worry about, and, don't, just go back to watching Game of Thrones, the new season. Go back to wondering if the Isotopes are going to get in the playoffs. That's the local baseball team, I think. Or the basketball team, whatever. Just trouble yourselves with triviality, T.S. Eliot, the great poet, said, we are distracted from distraction by distraction. And that's, again, getting off the tweets, getting off the internet and into the streets, getting mobilized, meeting your kindred spirits. That's how we grow as a movement. When you look around today, now you heard, a wonderful speech from Anne, and, perhaps we've inspired you, but you do the work. We're leaving in a day or two. I'm leaving tomorrow morning, speaking in Denver on Friday, Spokane, all over the country. It's about finding kindred spirits, and it's through solidarity that we have strength. That's the old union's, slogan, solidarity for all. That's so important and so critical. And here is a nucleus of that solidarity. Your friends, your neighbors, talk to one another, find out what's going on. Get in young people, bring in your grandchildren, bring in your children to these events. We'll try not to be so boring and spice it up a little bit. But it's very important to engage youth and bring them into the discussion and talk about the issues that are going to affect them. Now, I'm going to now veer off topic a little bit and also caution against what historically has been a problem on our side, on the left, and that is, kinds of insisting on purity and, never having, said or done a wrong thing. June Jordan, who was a wonderful poet, again, the daughter of immigrants, her mother was from Panama and her father was from Jamaica. She wrote a poem called A Short Note to My Very Critical and Well-Beloved Friends and Comrades. This is about, as she said, there are a lot of Stalinists out there. A lot of people like to feel they are right. So she wrote this particular poem, A Short Note. First they said I was too light. Then they said I was too dark. Then they said I was too different. Then they said I was too much the same. Then I said I was too young. Then they said I was too old. Then they said I was too interracial. Then they said I was too much a nationalist. Then they said I was too silly. Then they said I was too angry. Then they said I was too idealistic. Then they said I was too confusing altogether. Make up your mind, they said. Are you militant or sweet? Are you vegetarian or meat? Are you straight or are you gay? And I said, June Jordan, hey, it's not about those things, it's about my mind. It's about my ideas. It's about my conviction. So we have a tendency to, sift people out from our midst. She voted for Nader, can't talk to her. She drives an SUV, can't talk to her. I bike everywhere. She doesn't eat organic arugula, can't talk to her. Like that Martin Niemöller poem, there's nobody left. So finding common ground. As Nader says, and many others, we have majoritarian issues on our side. People want a clean environment. People want affordable housing. People want universal health care. In poll after poll, all of these things have a great majority of popular support. It's a corrupt political system that is not responding to what people want and what people need and what people deserve. And now because it was announced that we'd talk a little bit about Edward Said and the question of Palestine. June Jordan, the poet that I just read from, she said, I can't think of another subject in the world today or in the United States that people approach with more trepidation and fear. Palestinians are not seen as having normal, regular human rights, while Israel is seen as exempt from international law. That perpetrates a racist discourse that is the moral litmus test of my life. That's June Jordan speaking. Edward Said, the great Palestinian-American scholar who I had the privilege of knowing and doing a couple of books with him. The latest one is out there, reissued. He died in 2003. He said, I have been unable to live an uncommitted or suspended life. I have not hesitated to declare my affiliation with an extremely unpopular cause. And that cause, of course, is Palestine. He said, Palestine is a thankless cause, one in which you truly serve, you get nothing back but opprobrium, abuse, and ostracism. Palestine is the cruelest, most difficult cause to uphold, not because it is unjust, Said said, but because it is just, and yet very dangerous to speak about. How many friends avoid the subject? How many colleagues want no part of Palestine's controversy? How many bien-pensant liberals have time for Bosnia and Chechnya, and Somalia and Rwanda, and South Africa and Nicaragua, and human and civil rights everywhere on earth, but not for Palestine and Palestinians? And why? Why? One has to ask that question. What is it about Palestine and Palestinians that has made it so difficult to have a good dialogue, a discourse around the issue? I just did an interview with Ilan Pappé, the great Israeli dissident historian who incidentally was driven out of Israel, now teaches in England. And he said a couple of things that really piqued my curiosity. One is that the master decides the departure point of any discussion. So, for example, if a Palestinian kills some Israelis, that's where the discussion starts. And everybody piles on, and we can agree this is a tragic thing, it shouldn't happen. But why is it happening? Why do Kashmiris kill Indian soldiers? Because they're bloodthirsty? Because they're Muslims? Because they have nothing better to do? There's a reason. It's called occupation. And occupation so distorts the sinews of a culture, of a people, of a civilization, that it makes literally breathing extremely difficult. I've spent a lot of time in India. In fact, I'm banned from India since 2011 because of my work on Kashmir, and that ban continues. When I went to Iran a couple of years ago, same thing happened to me as happened to Ann Wright. Every time I came back into the United States, I was held for secondary screening, questioning, why did you go to Iran? Who did you see? Don't you have anything better to do? And kind of very dismissive. At the same time, not very sophisticated about Iran or the politics of the Middle East. But things I sense, I'm not going to use a term like the tectonic plates are moving, but there is some movement now on Palestine. Just in the last few weeks, I bring to your attention a wonderful article by Michelle Alexander called Time to Break the Silence on Palestine. And this was published in the New York Times, okay, our record, the newspaper of record, our most prestigious newspaper. And she talks about how Martin Luther King in 1967 at Riverside Church broke the silence around Vietnam. In the same way, today, it's important for us to break the silence around Palestine. A brilliant article. Also, her book on incarceration, The New Jim Crow, is, path-breaking. She's a pioneer in that area. Michelle Goldberg wrote a piece called Anti-Zionism Isn't the Same as Anti-Semitism. Again, we are able to separate these things. Do some people hate Jews? They do. It's unacceptable. It's horrendous. We have to denounce it each and every time it happens. There is such a thing as I'll use that term, anti-Semitism, anti-Jewish feeling. It's unacceptable. But criticism of the policies of the state does not make you, ipso facto, anti-Semite. We keep those things separate. So Michelle happens to be a young Jewish woman, very talented, a great journalist, has an op-ed column in the New York Times arguing this very point. This just in the last couple of days, let me just read you these particular titles. Some are from The Intercept, which I commend to you all. Others are from Al Jazeera. Pro-Israel lobby caught on tape boasting that its money influences Washington. Okay, that would be AIPAC, right? The American Israel Public Affairs Committee. They have long been saying this, by the way. Netanyahu has boasted that he owns Congress, that he has friends in very high places. And I have no quarrel with, lobbying. That's the American way. Even the Armenians, this little community in this country, they have a lobby in Washington. The NRA has a lobby. To talk about them, I think, is important and healthy, and it makes the discussion transparent rather than something that's carried out in the back rooms with, men sitting around a table smoking cigars. Here's an article by Mehdi Hassan. There's a taboo against criticizing AIPAC, and Ilhan Omar just destroyed it. Israel's Judaization of Palestine is failing. Decades of Israeli efforts to demolish, destroy, rename, rewrite, and erase everything Palestinian have been in vain. Ramzi Baroud in Al Jazeera. Israel kills Palestinians and Western liberals shrug. Their humanitarianism is a sham. So we have something in this country called PEP. Are you familiar with that? Progressive Except Palestine. So as Edward Said pointed out, lots of tears shed for Somalia and for Yemen and for Chechnya and Bosnia, and they should be shed. But when it comes to Palestine, not progressive at all. There are currently 600,000 colonists. I'm not going to use the word settler or settlement. These are colonies. This is settler colonial imperialism, where a population is brought in from outside to replace the indigenous population. Frantz Fanon wrote about this in Algeria and the tremendously negative impact also on the occupiers. I mean, we know what's happening to the occupied. Their homes are being demolished. They're being forced off their land. But to the occupiers, a certain brutalization occurs. And you see that during the march on Gaza a few months ago, where sharpshooters, snipers, were picking off peaceful demonstrators, killing almost 200, but even beyond that number of 200, so many were crippled, hit in the legs, arms, limbs were, had to be removed. Hundreds and hundreds of that kind of thing. Housing demolitions, collective punishment, the very thing that the Nazi regime was held out for prosecution in Nuremberg in 1946. Collective punishment. When the Czech resistance killed Heydrich, the notorious head of the Czechoslovakia at that time, and a real killer, one of the architects of the Holocaust, the Germans, in retribution for the assassination of Heydrich, completely wiped out a town called Lidice. And that kind of thing goes on, all the time. Maybe the scale is slightly different, but Israel gets away with murder because it has the support, diplomatic, military, economic, and moral support from the government of the United States. So that's why I'm talking about Palestine to you. I can't talk, about Myanmar or Laos or other places where we're not as deeply engaged. We are the enablers of the occupation in Palestine. We are the enablers of the injustice. So it behooves us. It's our duty to do something about it. And I know all of you here are in this movement. Sabeel has a table, just one of the many organizations that is working on this particular issue. Suffering cannot be quantified. I am the son of genocide survivors. Does that give me the opportunity or the privilege or the license to oppress you? Of course not. If anything, I should be more sympathetic or more compassionate if you are suffering because of what, my family's experience was. My mother was 10 years old. 25 of her family members were killed in 1915. Incidentally, by the Turks, an ally of the U.S., NATO member, that is still denying that this historical fact ever happened. The way Israel denies the Nakba happened, where Israel, spreads its propaganda that, Arab radio broadcasts told the Palestinians to leave Palestine, the Arab armies are coming to liberate you. It never happened. All propaganda. But, the powerful control the cameras. They control the TV, the radio, the newspapers, and the magazines. So cutting through that is really important. And to talk about U.S. foreign policy, you have to talk about imperialism. That's what it's about. It's an aggressive... Even some of our most liberal and astute commentators, do not use this term. They may talk about Soviet imperialism or British imperialism or French imperialism, but not U.S. imperialism. What are we doing with over 800 military bases around the world? Which infuriates me when you have our so-called representatives in Washington say, we hear your pain, I think you should have affordable housing and we should have a clean environment, we should have, all these things, but you know what, there's no money. There's plenty of money. Just look at the Pentagon budget approaching $1 trillion. And it's never enough because they keep inventing enemies, new enemies. You know, remember the freedom fighters in Afghanistan, the Mujahideen? Reagan was in love with them. Well, they became the Taliban later. They became Al-Qaeda, ISIS, all of these groups that are, mushrooming as a direct result of our bellicose interventions, our, attacking countries, coup d'etats, not just soft coup d'etat, maybe in Venezuela, coup d'etat destroying democracy in Iran, overthrowing regimes, supporting the most misogynistic regimes in the world, like Saudi Arabia, like Kuwait, like the United Arab Emirates. I make this joke that, if a Saudi woman, it's a little exaggerated, but you get the point. If a Saudi woman went to sleep tonight and woke up in Iran tomorrow, she'd think she's in heaven. Now, this is not to say women are liberated in Iran, but they can drive cars, they can own property, they can sue for divorce, they have child custody, laws that favor women in Iran. You don't hear about that Iran, you hear about the threat. And so, a threat, so we need more weapons, we have to defend ourselves, we need more bases in the Middle East, so you have this whole, ring of bases in that region. And this all goes back to the founding kind of document of U.S. imperialism, which was crafted by George Kennan, who is regarded as a kind of demigod almost, very reasonable, sober, Princeton educated, articulate, eloquent, astute, all of these qualities. He was the dean of U.S. foreign policy. He said this in 1948. We have about 50% of the world's wealth, but only 6% of its population. In this situation, we cannot fail to be the object of envy and resentment, Kennan said. Now, our real task in the coming period is to devise a pattern of relationships which will permit us to maintain this position of disparity. And that's what all these military alliances are about. That's what NATO is about, and all of the other, Baghdad Pact, CENTO Pact, all of these military arrangements. Now, those figures have changed a little bit. We don't have 50% of the world's wealth anymore, and we're not 6% of the population, but the pattern of relationships continue that maintain a U.S. hegemonic power. The WTO, the IMF, the World Bank, the Pentagon, all of these institutions of power. And once in a while, the prostitutes, that's what I call some of our esteemed journalists, none more famous than Thomas Friedman, multiple Pulitzer Prize winner. When you hear the word Thomas Friedman and the Middle East, you should be like in awe, because his Arabic is flawless. He speaks, he says hummus and falafel, dolma. Awesome. You have to just, salute him for his mastery of Arabic. But, every once in a while, the cat comes out of the bag and they say something that's truthful, maybe inadvertently. The hidden hand of the market will never work without a hidden fist. McDonald's cannot flourish without McDonnell Douglas. And the hidden fist that keeps the world safe for Silicon Valley's technologies to flourish is called the U.S. Army, Air Force, Navy, and Marine Corps. And that is he calls it, he's telling it exactly as it is. McDonnell Douglas is now Lockheed Martin. They changed their names, they put on new shirts, but the same military-industrial complex that Eisenhower warned the country about in his farewell address in January 1961 not only continues, has greatly expanded. And by the way, if Eisenhower were alive today, there would be no place for him in the Republican Party. Maybe he would be considered a liberal Democrat. That's how far that particular party has moved to the right. And then you have, the media with all of its reductionism about Muslims, about Islam. There's a whole bevy of motion pictures coming out of Hollywood like 12 Strong, American Sniper, Lone Survivor, 1517 to Paris, Zero Dark 30, 13 Hours Benghazi, Black Hawk Down, and on and on and on. Our people are being subjected to a constant stream of propaganda about them, the other, the thing that Edward Said dedicated his life to overcoming, the reductionist kinds of simplistic stereotypes of Muslims and flying carpets and genies coming out of lamps and, harems and, lustful women who seem, if you see all of these paintings by Delacroix and Jérôme and all of these imperial artists, all the Muslim women have their mouths open and their legs opened, just waiting to be conquered. So that's one extreme. The other extreme is, the AK-47 brandishing terrorist who just wants to kill because they're born to kill. It's in their religion or whatever. Those are the two extremes. In between those reductionist stereotypes is an incredibly diverse and rich civilization speaking, wonderful languages, not just Arabic, but Urdu, Farsi, Pashto, Bangla, so many 1.2 billion Muslims, beautiful music in India, in Iran, in Turkey. We're cut off from that culture. We're cut off. We're stuck between these two kinds of stereotypes. And just to give, I know I'm probably running out of time, but ABC World News Tonight. Okay, so we're talking about the media now. World News. Pay attention to the world news that David Muir delivered. This is Friday, March 1st, but on any day you can turn into any of the major networks, and it's pretty much a replication of this. The lead story, weather, a storm, clips of abandoned cars in snowdrifts, motorists stuck for hours, trucks jackknifed. That's 3 or 4 minutes, weather, okay, of which you can do nothing about other than, look at the snow, it's snowing. Next item, this is kind of a Florida-oriented newscast. Plane crashes into an 18-story building in Fort Lauderdale. This is World News Tonight, okay? Continuing. This might be a world news topic, but it's, family outrage from the Warmbiers over their son when Trump said that, Kim Jong-un denies knowing anything about his son their son being tortured, and they came out and denounced the great leader, the great prevaricator, as I call him. I use that word because most audiences don't know it. So, liar. 9,000 and counting, right? Yet he had the gumption, he had the cojones yesterday to talk about Michael Cohen, he called him a stone cold liar. So I don't know, I don't know what you would call, the great prevaricator. All right, next news item, and of course there, now commercials in between about, living forever with this miracle drug that's overpriced that we've paid for through the National Institutes of Health, our research, our tax dollars. And then, at the end, it's really hilarious. I fall out of my seat. If you take this, drug, you may get, kidney failure, heart attack, double pneumonia, asthma, tuberculosis. I mean, it's like 5 minutes of, disavowals of what you might get. All right, next news item, World News Tonight, Jared Kushner's security clearance. Moderate world news. Fifth item, this was the cutting edge one, I thought. The research, the resources that go into this kind of journalism. Former patient attacked her therapist with a knife. This is an item on the World News Tonight. Then David Muir played a panic 911 call from the therapist, screaming, help me, my patient's trying to kill me with a knife. Next item, CEO of the San Francisco Giants, that's a baseball team, beating his wife in public. Okay, I mean, a horrible thing, but world news. Next, Amazon cargo plane crashes in Houston. Next, miracle in Florida. Teenager trapped in her bedroom by a plane crash. Then there's a BP commercial. BP, the friends who are so green and environmentally sensitive that brought you Deep Horizon. And the coup in Iran, incidentally, when it was called the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company in 1953. Then they changed their names to British Petroleum. Now it's BP. Another item, manhunt on for a hit-and-run driver who killed a woman in Florida, again. Another item, chilling murders in New Jersey, body never found. I don't know about you, but chilling murders kind of warms me a little bit. It's better than warming murders. Chilling murders in New Jersey. Then, the last item, and this I had to do some research, saying goodbye to a TV legend, Katherine Hellman. Now, I never heard of this person. Apparently, she's a TV star of Who's the Boss and Soap, two very popular TV programs. That was like the last couple of minutes. Now, in 2018, you may have heard there was a royal wedding. The royal wedding got 3 times the coverage of the catastrophe that has been unfolding in Yemen, where again we are implicated because our major ally, Saudi Arabia, has been carrying out carpet bombing attacks on that very poor country, a country, in fact, which may be the first country to have a total shortage of fresh water on top of all of their other issues. And do you remember last year, a couple of months ago, the teenagers in Thailand who were stuck in a cave, because of rising waters? Night after night, the lead story with the news anchors, how they're so breathless, well, David, right behind me, there's that cave, you see the opening, it's kind of dark right now, we can't see anything inside of it, but that's where those 12 kids are, and rescuers are standing by, hoping to launch, an operation that will save the lives of those young children. Stay tuned. Thank you, David, for that in-depth report. So, there it is, you have a media that doesn't do its job. And hopefully alternative radio, which you can hear on KUNM every Saturday at 6 p.m. Sorry for that commercial plug. Actually, I'm going to conclude now. That's an applause line. With some poetry and art, because I think art, as Edward Said says in this book, Culture and Resistance, art is very important. Yes, we've got to know the intellectual arguments. Yes, we've got to read Chomsky and Medea Benjamin and find out what Code Pink is doing and all of that. But we also need literature. We need film. We need music and theater, things that enrich us as human beings and get us outside of this maybe cramped box we're in. And it was no less an authority than George Bernard Shaw who said, without art, the crudeness of reality would make the world unbearable. Emma Goldman, the great revolutionary, said, art has the power to make ideas felt. I'm going to start with Lawrence Ferlinghetti, who is turning 100 years old, Sally Alice, in a couple of days. 100 years old, the founder of City Lights Books on Broadway in North Beach in San Francisco, the first bookstore to actually sell paperbacks. Quite an innovation when he started doing that. And this speaks to what we're talking about tonight. Speak out. And a vast paranoia swept across the land. And America turns the attack on its twin towers into the beginning of the Third World War. The war with the Third World, and no one speaks. And when they come to round up all the great writers and poets and painters, the National Endowment of the Arts of Complacency will not speak, while all the young men are in the killing fields again. So now is the time for you to speak, all you lovers of liberty, all you lovers of the pursuit of happiness, all you lovers and sleepers deep in your private dreams. Now is the time for you to speak, O silent majority, before they come for you. Lawrence Ferlinghetti. Marge Piercy is a great feminist contemporary poet. I hope you're familiar with her work. In the past in Albuquerque, I've read her poem, The Moon is Always Female. It's a wonderful poem, a wonderful collection of books. This is a relatively new poem she wrote called We Give Up Far Too Easily. Why do people get so discouraged about political action? You take vitamin pills and imagine they'll do something for you. You don't say, I'll never wash the dishes again because they'll just get dirty. We all mumble silly prayers into the air. Oh, please, please don't let me miss the plane. Oh, please, please let him call me back. Inaction certainly will work fine, for the overlords who own our work, control our lives, consider us collateral loss in their grand schemes. They only fear people in motion. A little at a time is the way forward. An unending dance, 2 steps forward, 1.5 back. Sitting on your ass too long makes you one. Marge Pearson. Okay, since you're laughing, I'm going to do 2 more. Arundhati Roy from India, very courageous woman, risks her life to speak the truth about Indian occupation of Kashmir, Indian crushing of various leftist movements throughout the country. A remarkable woman I've had the pleasure of knowing and working with. She said, "Fortunately, power has a shelf life. When the time comes, maybe this mighty empire will, like others before it, overreach itself and implode from within. It looks as though structural cracks have already appeared." This is in 2002, she's writing this, right? 17 years ago. It appears as though structural cracks have already appeared. The time has come, the walrus said. Perhaps things will get worse and then better. Perhaps there's a small goddess up in heaven readying herself for us. Another world is not only possible, she's on her way. Maybe many of us won't be here to greet her, but on a quiet day, if I listen very carefully, I can hear her breathing. Arundhati. Frederick Douglass, August 4th, 1857, the great abolitionist, freedom fighter from the West Indies. This was the West India Emancipation. You've heard this before, but you can never hear it enough times. If there's no struggle, there is no progress. Those who profess to favor freedom, yet deprecate agitation, are men and women who want crops without plowing the ground. They want rain without thunder and lightning. They want the ocean without the mighty roar of its rivers and waters. The struggle may be a moral one, or it may be a physical one, or it may be both moral and physical. But it must be a struggle. Power concedes nothing without a demand. It never has, and it never will. Viva Albuquerque Center for Peace and Justice! 35 more years! Viva! Thank you very much. I'd love to talk to you in the back and sign up for Alternative Radio. Thank you. Thank you.